Hello and welcome to another episode of the SMEFocus show brought to you by FactoryNOW TV. I'm your host, Chris Greenough, and in this series we focus on SMEs within the British manufacturing sector and indeed those supporting the sector. Every week we discuss and analyse the challenges and opportunities facing the sector in these unprecedented times, and indeed they are unprecedented times. So only a couple of weeks ago we've had the election. Let's see how the new government gets on. So as I say, I've worked in the sector for over 29 years. I'm CCO at SD Technology, one of the leading manufacturers of pressings and assemblies in the UK. So hopefully you can appreciate this show is very much for manufacturers and by manufacturers. Joining me today, I've got great pleasure in introducing my guest, who is David Bovis, who is a partner at Duxinaroe. David, hello and welcome.
Hi, Chris. Thanks.
Nice to see you. Well, nice to see you, and thanks for coming on the show. I couldn't get my head round what the name of your business was until the penny dropped, and then it's Duxinaroe, isn't it? That's quite simple.
Yeah, and there's another level to it. Dux is Latin for leader as well, so it's leaders in a return on equity on top of the getting your ducks in a row. So
fantastic. So tell me about Duxinaroe and what you actually do.
Well, I guess the long and short of it nowadays is that we teach leaders about brains and how they work. We teach neuroscience to people. Okay. I should probably qualify why. It's because my business partner and I have both been in industry. We're both engineers by training. I was a plastic injection mold tool maker, and he started out in research R&D element.
Yeah.
And we've been in industry for about 38 years each. He's a couple of years older than me. He lives out in Turkey, and we've seen a lot. So what we've done, we've become directors of businesses. We've had P&L responsibility. Yep. He was country president for Toyota in Turkey. Okay. He grew the Greenfield site to 240,000 production units from a standing start. Spent time in Japan, speaks fluent Japanese. And between us, he's in the consistent Toyota approach to what we all try to copy in the West under the sort of TPS, world-class and lean banner. Yeah. And I got the Western version of it. So I've been around aerospace, automotive, defence, quarrying 12-ton lumps of stone, building hydrogen fuel cells and everything in between. And we both ended up in the same place, having studied philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. And when we saw how brains work, we went, this explains everything. So between us, we created this approach that we're supporting now, supporting leadership teams all around the world. And I guess really today, although we've got that very deep, lean TPS knowledge and experience, having led it from the front and as consultants to lead change programs for companies, we're really a people development company because we focus on the Japanese got that term hitozukuri that sits behind the strategy deployment approach they use, Hoshinkanri. And that's what we're all about. We're about getting, if you get the people bit right, everything else seems to fall into place. But all this looking for the profit, you keep upsetting the people. So we're reversing the tables, and that's what we're doing.
Absolutely. And you use a lot, so you help business, you help leaders, and you use BFTA. Explain to us what that is.
Yeah, BTFA, it's that one there. It's Believe, Think, Feel, Act.
Okay.
So it's a model I came up with about 18 years ago in amongst all the studies alongside, running businesses. And it seems to have been quite popular. We often link it to Deming's PDCA cycle. And so Deming, that approach to improvement is very logical. We are, as Philip Holt from GK and Aerospace said when we were working with those guys, he said, you've codified emotion so even engineers and accountants can understand why they're important to get right. So that's kind of what we're doing. And BTFA is that it's neuroscience in a box. So it really simplifies a very complex subject so everybody can get it very easily. And then once we teach leadership teams a bit more about that, how it works, it completely changes your view of what good looks like and how to approach running a business, running a project, running a change program, deploying strategy, whatever else it might be that you have to do to create a high performance culture that's going to sustain change and weather out the storms. Like you said, we're in unprecedented times and it's a difficult time to be in business. If you're going to have a business like we've seen with Toyota, as a great example that stands, head and shoulders above many, it comes down to culture, and culture comes down to leadership, behavior, conduct, beliefs, and beliefs are fundamentally the way your brain has been imprinted to fire and how it's wired. And if we don't really get that bit, we make a lot of mistakes in our approach. So yeah, that's what BTFA is all about. It's teaching leaders. I mean, but expand on the model a little bit. Belief is basically the wiring. Thinking is the firing of that wiring. When we're talking about neurons in brains, the feeling is the chemical mix that shifts and changes based on that wiring firing pattern being engaged or not, in response to our environment. And how we act and behave is the outcome of all of that happening at a subconscious level before we become conscious of it. And, the great thing that has been discovered in the last 15 years is that we have agency to change that default wiring pattern based on the way we think and what we believe. So it's a kind of a circular reference type scenario with the way the brain works. But once we understand the mechanism, we can do something about it. And that is what's changing so much for people.
And it's you're saying it is, you go back to nature and nurture. You're saying you can actually change the way people think and behave and act. Yeah.
What we're seeing is people saying, "Oh, since I've been through BTFA with you guys, I'm now a much more resilient person." It builds people's confidence because they accept themselves for how they're designed to function. They recognize and see the patterns of response when it comes to fear-based responses, and they start to recognize what stress triggers look like in the work environment, and can therefore target the reduction of those stress triggers, so that people's brains are in a better position to be able to change, rather than accepting everything we do that is a stress trigger has to remain the same because it's systematized, it's part of the culture, it's part of the belief system, and then saying, "Oh, but on top of that, we want you to change." And it's when you look at it through the brain lens, you go, "Oh, well, that's ridiculous. People can't change if they're under this time pressure or under the stress of not being able to pay the bills or, whatever else it might be." So yeah, it does make a profound difference. And we're seeing, even exec teams who have been butting heads for years repair relationships because they get to week 3 of what we take them through and they go, "Look how silly our brains are being. Why are we doing this to ourselves and each other? Let's just start getting along," because they can understand how they can facilitate the shift in their thinking so that's possible.
So you gave me examples. Can you give us more examples of stress in a business leading team where they've got lots of pressure and how that could be resolved?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of case studies behind us now. If I go way back when I sort of first did this, not in the format it's in now, because we've obviously continuously improved it over the years. It's much more effective now. But even going way back to the recession, 2008, 2012, I was helping a business in Mansfield, and they had tried the Lean, they tried the Six Sigma, they had consultants over from America, they'd spent a lot of money, they've been loss making for 5 years, they're under a lot of pressure. They were getting hammered from above from the US holding company to start getting back into profit, and there was a lot of pressure on everybody. And ultimately, having tried Lean and Six Sigma and different strategy models, they said, "Oh, we must need culture change." So that's when I got involved. And I mean, I taught them the basics of how brains work, then used that filter to look at what's going on in the business, and that completely changed the way they approached, well, a lot of things. They changed the way they approached their town hall communications. They embraced Hoshinkanri as a strategy deployment model and actually practiced the catchball part of it to include people very well. They changed a few things in their ERP system. They swapped a couple of people around between purchasing and sales. And ultimately, mid-recession, posted 63% EBITDA improvement and remained in profit for 7 years thereafter until they were sold by the group to another group in their field. So, that's the kind of results that in a stressed environment I would expect to see when you get a fundamental mindset shift in the leadership team, and they realize, oh, this is why it doesn't work for people. This is what we've got to do to make it work for people. They do that and it works. So
it's fairly simple. And does every business, in your opinion, have the similar issues that you've seen in your working career?
Do you know, insofar as if you employ people and they've got a brain, then yes.
So that's yes then.
That's a yes then, yeah. And it's because I've had the good fortune to work with sort of government funded projects like Manufacturing Advisory Service and Growth Accelerator and those kind of projects as well along the way. I've also been in big city consulting firms and as a sort of an associate director leading projects and programs. And it means I've had the great privilege of being through the doors of hundreds and hundreds of companies, SMEs, mid-market and corporates. And yeah, I think the answer is, yeah, we because we've educated everybody within their swim lanes, and that looks like leadership best practice and change management best practice and project management best practice. And none of that up until 15, 16, 20 years ago was informed by neuroscience. We've necessarily made mistakes when it comes to doing what brains need to adapt, which is a process called neurogenesis, and we've all heard of neuroplasticity and that kind of stuff. So when you understand that process and what the brain needs to be able to facilitate that, then you can see that what we do in business as what is called best practice historically sometimes makes mistakes. And it's those mistakes that we make on the people front around the human factors, if you like, that inhibit change programs, slow progress down. And ultimately, it all comes back down to a fear-based response. There's a system between brain and body called the HPA axis, and it goes from the thalamus to the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland to the adrenal glands on top of your kidneys, and that's all part of that fight-flight process. You know, you've got ACTH as a precursor to cortisol and then adrenaline, and you know all the different chemicals that change the way you feel, which is the F part of BTFA, and that fear-based response that we all know and experience and all suffer from, if you want to put it like that, deeply imprinted in childhood, right? So it happens in our formative years, and it's fundamentally a response to a fear of failure or rejection. So that kind of imposed control from an authority figure is eat your greens, sit on the naughty step till you learn how to speak to me politely, you know, whatever it might be. It's imposed control. Yeah, and we haven't really got the language register in our brains at that point to describe it. So it's an emotional experience we can't ever verbalize. And so when we get into adulthood, that wiring and firing pattern's still there somewhere buried deep in the back of our brains. When the right amount of stimulus from the environment, from our boss, from the authority figure, or from the system that imposes control, whether that be through judgment mechanisms, policy, KPIs, if we've not been involved in establishing that and we haven't had agency over our own outcomes, then that can start to trigger that emotional response. So you're shutting the brain down because it changes the way the glucose energy works in the brain at that point in time. That doesn't allow you to work optimally. So you're not able to function at your best, and therefore you're not able to contribute the best to the organization. So it seems pretty obvious that if we're going to conduct ourselves as leaders in ways which subconsciously send a signal to the brain that says you're in a position where you're exposed to control by an authority figure, and so you need to have this fear-based response because you're not approved of, you're not valued, you're not worthy. And that's reinforced by the way we run the P&L and see people as a cost. And, you know, when we've got to make cost reductions, we make headcount reductions, and all the signals in the world say we're not valuable. And the one thing the human brain needs is to feel valued as part of the herd and to belong to something and have purpose and direction. So when we feel like we're making progress towards an outcome objective together, it releases the right chemicals in the brain like dopamine, which give us that intrinsic motivation and keep us moving forward together. And we just get that part of it all wrong. We're unaware of the psychology and the neuroscience. And because of that, we impose targets, we impose goals, we impose KPIs, thinking that because we're the boss, we have to know best, when often we don't. And so our own insecurities and defense mechanisms cut in, and we just create toxic cultures ultimately, and we can do so much better once we've got this knowledge.
Absolutely. And you talk about business leaders. Business leaders tend to micromanage. If you've got a really good team, you just need to let them do their job, don't you?
Yeah. And again, going back to not what I've learned from Levent particularly, because I've learned a lot from him in the last few years since we've worked together, but you know, principles I picked up along the way from my studies into the Japanese philosophy that sits behind TPS anyway. And one of those principles is letting go, right? And it's one of the things that the Japanese used to call Westerners concrete heads. You know, it's like, why can't you see that you need to let go and give people agency? You know, psychologically, it's self-determination theory. It's all these different principles that says if somebody can make their mind up about which direction they want to go in and they can make progress towards that, they're going to feel good about themselves. Now we've got the neuroscience to back up that theory, so we can't question it anymore. That's exactly what happens because of the way we release dopamine and the way that acts as part of our motivation and seeking mechanisms. So, you know, when it comes even just coming to goal setting, if you understand enough about the neuroscience, it tells you have to be inclusive in your approach, and to not to include people by telling them what decision you've made. Include people by giving them a chance to have a voice because their opinion's valued, and to listen actually and take it on board, and let that, where necessary, inform the strategy so they know they've been heard, and they feel part of the business. If we get that kind of stuff right, oh my goodness, the performance goes through the roof, because you're improving relationship at that point. People are connecting genuinely as human to human, and they collaborate better, they innovate more because of the way the chemicals shift in their brain and where the glucose energy can be utilized in the prefrontal cortex. And, you know, there's all this, I say the science just backs up the common sense, really. But
fantastic. And you talk about moving forward. We're halfway through the year. What does the rest of 2024 hold for you, your team, your business? Where are you going?
Good question. I think we've got a nice run rate now. We've got a few big clients. We work all over the world, so we've got clients in Canada and South Africa and all across Europe and America. And we're developing bigger programs of work. As people see what we do to begin with and introduce them to this approach, they then go, oh wow, you know, can you help us, support us with our Hoshin Cannery deployment? And that's what we're doing, and it's great, and I absolutely love it. I think there's a bit of development work for us. We're like any other pretty much startup. You know, we're a couple of years in, although I've had the company under this name for a long time. This approach is brand new for us. So we need to grow and develop ourselves and have a few sort of systems, do a bit of back office automation, that kind of thing. So I haven't got to raise manual invoices. But other than that, I think really I would like to just, and this is probably why we're talking, I'd love to be able to do more in the UK and support UK PLC, you know, an SME, knowing that it used to be the old statistics were 93% of GDP come from SMEs. I'm not sure if that's still about the same. You know, if that's the case, then how can we share what we've learned at this international global level in corporates and bring it to the party and help all of those guys running your 10, 20, 30 million turnover companies out there benefit from what we've laboured long and hard to learn, you know, through blood, sweat and tears. And if we can share it in the UK, that would be a nice part of our forward-going strategy, I think.
Absolutely, and that is why you're here, David, so we can spread the word on what you do. Fascinating to hear the work you do, the journey you're on. Thank you for your time, and we'll catch up soon.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, David. That brings us to the end of another show. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to meeting more of our British manufacturers, but also people like David and others who are supporting the manufacturing sector. As he said, SMEs are the key to a strong economy, and what we need to do is raise awareness, raise productivity. So great to hear the work David's doing at Duxinaroe. If you'd like to get in touch with the show with a comment, a suggestion, or even to appear on a future episode, please email us tv@mtd.media. That's it from me. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. So from me, Chris G at STE, goodbye.